What's going on, guys? Welcome to another book club with Robert Nichols, me, your host on the ClosersKlub Book Club tonight. I got Henry DeSoto with me. What's going on, Henry?
Nothing much, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing awesome, man. Doing awesome. Super excited. We're getting to cover this book. This is an amazing book that has really transformed my life and many other lives throughout America. I think he's got over 20 million copies sold. We're talking about Atomic Habits by James Clear tonight. This is really a book about understanding our environments, understanding how habits directly correlate to our lives, and ultimately how to leverage habits to get more out of life, to be able to live the lives we desire to live, and to make more money, have better relationships, and just live healthier lifestyles for years to come. Would you agree with this, Henry?
Absolutely. Said it
Excellent, man.
very well said.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we're going to jump in tonight to chapter 2 and chapter 3. We've been doing this 2 weeks now. So last week we jumped in and read the intro in chapter 1. And chapter 2, I'm going to get right into it, Henry. I got my notes here. Chapter 2 is the first law, the man who didn't look right. And so this chapter is really talking about how, as people, we can quickly observe small cues that can have massive implications to help us protect ourselves in certain environments, help us protect others. And the reason the title is titled that is that there was a paramedic who saw her father-in-law at a family gathering, and immediately she said, "You need to go to the hospital, brother. You don't look right." And she was able to predict a blockage in one of his arteries, and he avoided a heart attack, and she saved his life. And so your ability to notice relevant cues in a given situation are the foundations for every habit that we have at the end of the day here. So I think it's really important that we start to understand that, we have these innate abilities where we can kind of see things that a lot of folks can't see. And a lot of times, it really allows us to make better decisions. Have you experienced anything like this, Henry, kind of on your journey in life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we touched on it in a different conversation, but more about noticing the habits that you may have internally with certain thought patterns in certain situations. And I think, like you mentioned before, having someone else kind of notice that for you can do wonders if you are in a situation of growth where people can kind of see perhaps a negative tendency you may have that's, ongoing, and then kind of point that out.
Absolutely, man. I mean, one of those habits, another example he gave was a preschool teacher who had been teaching preschool for many years. She left her job as a teacher and transitioned over to working a 9 to 5. And every time her coworkers went to the bathroom, she would comment, "Make sure you wash your hands now before you come back." And it really, people were just kind of confused, like, what is happening? But it really speaks to how our brains are just kind of automatic once those grooves are formed, good and bad, right? Those are innocent habits, but bad habits, the same thing happens. And so I think that it's really important that we develop habits that serve us versus automatic habits that don't. And Henry, can you touch on any routines you created to kind of help you curate and cultivate, longer term habits?
I think what's worked for me recently and for a little bit is visualization. Imagine yourself, in certain environments before it happens. I think that can do wonders for just your identity and how you are in certain situations, which will, in nature, kind of adjust those habits for you. So that's something that I've been really kind of into, and really seeing things before they happen, and works wonders.
I love it, man. Visualization is an awesome way to really start to intentionally predict the outcomes in your life. And he gets into the intentionality and the importance of being intentional, especially as men out here, really striving to figure out how to achieve our goals, what our days need to look like to get the most out of life. So he also mentions a habit scorecard, right? Like, so speaking of visualization, he talks about a habit scorecard. And a part of the habit scorecard he mentions is in your environment, pointing and calling out things, right? Like verbally stating things. We're going to get into what this principle is really about. But he gave a story of a woman whose life was saved in Japan, because in Japan, the railway train operators, anytime they pull up to a station, they got a checklist of like 20 points, and they're pointing to the sign. They're calling out this, calling out that. And one day a lady was on the tarmac and her son ran into the train on the bullet train, and the doors closed. And so she stuck her hand in, her hand was stuck, and the train started to move. But because they had this checkpoint system, one of the conductors saw her and told him to stop and literally saved this woman's life, because this train goes 300 miles an hour. So it would have been a disaster if that hadn't happened. And so really he encourages us to do the same thing in our lives, right? Like, observe your thoughts and actions without judgment. Don't praise yourself or for success, and don't blame yourself for your faults. Step one to changing your habits is being aware of them. And so that's really where he wants us and encourages us to just create a scorecard and rate each of our habits. If it's good, write a plus sign. If it's bad, write a negative sign. If it's neutral, write an equal sign. And he says good versus bad is not actually accurate. It's really effective versus ineffective. And so we want to adopt effective habits in our life. And, when I read this, it was really powerful because he used the analogy of cigarettes. He was like, people smoke cigarettes to reduce stress, right? Now, cigarettes have been proven to be effective at reducing stress in the long run. But at the end of the day, exercise also reduces stress. Cigarettes in the short run, and exercise reduces stress in the long run. And so have you had any experience, Henry? What are your thoughts on this concept of really identifying habits, being objective and not being overly hard on yourself, but calling them out for what they are? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's it. I think when you're on the road to self-improvement and, everybody knows certain parts of themselves they want to improve. So you may notice certain habits that you do. And, ultimately it is up to you, from a conscious standpoint to be aware. But like you touched upon in terms of like having judgment or kind of a negative feeling towards it, that doesn't reinforce change. It just puts you kind of in a shame and a guilt space. And I've definitely been in situations where you kind of just mindful of those things.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. He also talks about really the power of writing your goals and speaking your goals to really incite change. They did a study, and I thought it was pretty interesting. It's called the implementation intention formula. But they basically did a study where they had 3 groups in England, right? The first group, they told them to exercise and track it. The second group, they told them to exercise, track it, and gave them some motivation in the form of talking about the benefits of working out. The third group, they gave them the instructions to work out. They told them to track it. They told them the pros and cons of exercise and working out. But most importantly, they said, in addition to those 3 things, also write down the dates and times you're going to work out and say it out loud as well. And so by writing it and speaking it, the first 2 groups performed the exercise at a rate of about 35% of the group exercised. The last group that had all 3 instructions, about 91% of them completed the workouts, Henry, because they say the trick to kind of fooling yourself to really engaging in a habit is writing it and speaking it. And it's crazy because that's actually a biblical principle as well. You've seen that woven throughout the Bible about writing when people are being taught and speaking. There's power in what we say and power in what we write to really move us to that next level in our life, especially as men, really speaking over our days, right? They talk about at the beginning of the day, you want to bring order to chaos. That's what Genesis is all about. And so, I found for me that it's really powerful to do that. And how about yourself? What are your thoughts on that, and what experiences do you have with that?
Yeah, I guess my experience with it is really, being very intentional with my calendar and really using it more. I find that when I do write that in there, I can visualize that part of the day just being blocked out for that specific thing. And I think it just brings a certain level of confidence that you are going to get done this time in your day. And if it's a positive thing, like we went back in the chapter before, how you had the plus minus and whatever. I mean, if you're really writing your things down on a daily basis to what you need to get accomplished, you can visually see how your day is going to look, right? I mean, I got a bunch of positives or a bunch of negatives, but writing it down just brings a certain level of I know I'm going to have it done. There's a time and place where I'm going to get this thing done. I think it just tenfolds the chances of me actually doing it.
Absolutely, man. And I've seen the same in my life. So it's real. And, there's 2 more points he makes in this chapter that I think are powerful. The first is he states there's a simple formula. We talked about this. The I will do blank behavior at this time in this location. Be specific about it. Write it down if you want to see real change in your life. And then the other thing he says is many people think they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. Once implementation intention has been set, you don't have to wait for inspiration to strike, because you've already set the time and place and given yourself some verbal and written cues. Whenever that time happens, whenever you're ever in that location, you're able to really jump into that mindset and mode of getting things done.
Yeah, I
And then,
think Rob, I think
yep,
everyone. Sorry to cut you off. I think everybody knows that feeling where you haven't planned out your day, and perhaps
yes,
you just get overwhelmed with the amount of work, depending on what you do for a living. I mean, we're in the real estate business. You have a lot of to dos, and if you don't know how to execute on those things at a certain time, it can certainly bring you back a little bit in terms of your mental clarity. 100%.
yes, well said, man. The other thing too is like a little hack. He said like some people struggle with committing when they write things down and stating it, or even just getting started. And so he's like, if you're that person, he really encourages you to jump in and start at the beginning of the month. He's like, you really want to have hope and be hopeful in relation to the outcome of whatever goals you're pursuing. And he just says, psychologically, people tend to have more motivation at the beginning of the month. Because I feel like at the end of the month, sometimes you might have had a hard month, right? You might not have made the money you wanted to make. You might have struggled to pay the bills. But when you got that new month, you're like, all right, this is my time. I have an opportunity to get out here and get after it. And so I don't know if you've experienced that as well, like kind of different seasons of life. But if you have, let us know.
I think, because we work in, the finance field, you have quarters, you have, certain benchmarks throughout the year. So, like you said, if you don't perform in a way that you find satisfactory, then that you have another shot to really, try your best again. For some reason, having a start date is just very powerful in anything. It just kind of cleanses you of that negative energy, and you can kind of, try to keep it, start with another, full head of steam for the next round.
Absolutely, man. The last point he makes in that chapter, Henry, is distractions destroy dreams. I'll say it again. Distractions destroy dreams. Now, he didn't word it like that, but I know that to be true in my own life. And so he talks about the power of no in eliminating distractions. And he says a lot of people struggle with saying no, right? They're kind of in a mode where they want to help people out. They think, oh, just a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there. And before you know it, you're way off course. You're way far away from your goals because you're giving people too much of your time. And so I can tell you right now, like in my life at the moment, I'm transitioning to building the company, going from working in the business to working on the business. And so I have to say no to a lot of phone calls that could literally be a time suck for me, where I could be on the phone literally, Henry, for 4 hours straight, talking to clients, and it's all good work, right? I'm building relationships, and I can make the excuse that, oh yeah, I can do this. It's all right. But then what happens is my bigger vision and the tasks that are going to be required to grow the business, right? Actually getting out here and coming up with the marketing plans, building the systems, managing the team, advising the team so that we can do more, hiring people. All of those pieces are getting neglected when I'm on these calls. And so I've had to transition to saying no to many things, and then delegating as well, but distractions are dream killers if you allow them to be. And so I want to know, Henry, how do you deal with distractions relative to you growing your business?
So those are things that in this day and age you can get for a living. I think what I'm getting better at is not chasing everything that really kind of goes by. Is to really, get one thing done first before you move on to the next. And I think when you slow it down that way and you objectify how your day is going to look, I think that kind of helps with that feeling of just being clear. I'm not sure if I lost you for a second.
Well said, Henry. No, I heard you, man. My bad. Connection's a little spotty here.
It's all
but
good.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. That's the key. It's not a linear battle, right? It's ups and downs, ebbs and flows, and it's a daily battle. And as long as you commit and you know where you're going, and that's why it's important to understand like the inputs, like what you need to do in a day, because if you do know that, you really are positioning yourself for long-term success. I mean, we talked about this in the first chapter, but if you want to predict where you're going to be a year from now, look at where you're putting your time, look at where you're putting your attention, look at the habits that you're putting to work on every day relative to your business. And it's a lot easier to see where you're going to end up if you consistently engage in activities that are going to get you closer to where you want to be. let's jump into self-control, right? He talks about, habit stacking. So there's a story of a gentleman in France who created one of the first encyclopedias, right? Do you remember that story in the book, Henry? The Diderot effect here, Dennis Diderot?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so Dennis
Yeah.
was struggling, and one of the queens felt pity on him. He needed to pay for his daughter's wedding. He had these great books. And so she basically gave him the equivalent of $150,000. And so he was able to get his daughter this amazing wedding and, started to kind of upgrade his lifestyle. So started with getting a nice robe, where he felt like a dignitary now. He was out here flexing, flossing, like, okay, I got this. And, with this beautiful robe, he's back to his old house like, yo, this doesn't fit the new me. And so now he gets a new chair, then he gets a new, furniture, a new bed. And he started living a life that was fit for a king. But, James Clear talks about how with habits, it's the same, right? If you start kind of doing one thing, it makes it easier to kind of start building momentum step by step. He was like, one example he gave was like, after I have my morning coffee, I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes. And then after I meditate for 5 minutes, I'm going to get ready and leave and go to the gym, right? You kind of create these triggers of activity and habits that build on each other to build a better life. And I want to know, have you experienced that before? Is that something that you've adopted from reading this book or adopted in general? Or do you kind of just wake up and figure it out?
I think naturally, you just notice that certain things just work better for you in the morning at a certain time, right? So it so happens that when you wake up, you do X, Y, and Z. Having coffee. I'm not sure you're not really a caffeine guy.
I'm a matcha guy.
It does bring a certain level.
Matcha.
Huh? Matcha, yeah. Matcha is awesome. But yeah, I think you start to notice what really works for you.
Oh no, this is the clear matcha, invisible. Nah, that's water right here, man. H2O. If you were on the call, you didn't see the call from Ben yet, Ben Gomes, when he talked about the glass diet. We'll get into that on another day.
Smooth. All right. Hopefully, there's. I already know the significance on the classes, so I'm sure the glass is definitely.
Yep.
But the habit stack, I think as you get older, you start, having your routines in the morning, you start to notice that, certain things work for you, man. If you meditate after, some coffee and then you hit the gym immediately, it does something for you and you just continue to build on that.
Right, man. Now, habit stack has been huge for me. I can tell you guys my morning routine is pretty much religious, depending on the day, right? I got different activities in the morning, but the first thing I do when I wake up, I typically go into the bathroom, just keeping it 100, and then I'll read the Bible or devotional for like 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I was reading something and it said that 1% of your day is 14 minutes. So you literally can spend 14 minutes in prayer, reading scripture or a book that motivates you, even like Atomic Habits, to really set the tone for your day. And one of the things I'm very intentional about is speaking over my day and praying over my day. Like if I want my day, I talk about being prosperous. I pray for protection. I talk about my kids. I talk about my life. I talk about my businesses. And I really just kind of speak that out into the world to make sure that it aligns me and gets my mind right in a mode where I'm able to go out here, stay motivated, put in work, and do amazing things for the people I care about, my family, my customers, my loved ones, because ultimately business is service. And I think a lot of people forget that, right? Like, because we all want to be served. I get it. But the more we serve others, the more we get in return, especially if we're filling a void in their lives through what we do. Like even this book club, right? This is filling a void for someone out there who needs to hear this message to really get on the right track, because not everyone has parents that gave them that high level of motivation or instruction. And so if you didn't have that, these are the types of rooms you need to be in. These are the types of books you need to be reading. And these are the types of high level conversations you need to be having to really experience transformation in your own life. And so one of the next points he makes, he talks about motivation being overrated, Henry. We talk about speaking over your day, but it's also about changing your environment to really reflect what you need in order to get the most out of it. And so he gives a couple of examples here. Here my notes are. He talks about Mass General Hospital, actually, right? To talk about a point close to home, and how the head of the cafeteria and nutrition decided she wanted everyone in that hospital to eat a healthier foods and have a healthier lifestyle. So what does she do? She didn't even mention it to anyone. She just strategically changed the layout of the cafeteria, the food layout, where sodas were harder to access, waters were easier to access, healthy foods were easier to get to, unhealthy foods were harder to access. And before you know it, people were eating healthier. And so she's like, you can literally change your environment and have habits that make it hard. It almost makes the bad habits invisible. You know, on one of the Investors Edge calls, we had a psychologist come on, Ray Lambert, great guy. And he talked about how sometimes at work, he can be very inefficient. And it really comes down to distraction, something we mentioned earlier, right? So how does he eliminate distraction? Ray takes his phone, Henry, and leaves it in the car. And I think I mentioned this on the last call, but ultimately, this is a huge theme we see in Atomic Habits. It's eliminating distractions, making distractions invisible. And so I know for me, that's something that I battle with every day. I'm not a big scroller, believe it or not, right? It's weird. I've created this game in my head where if I ever have the urge to kind of scroll on social media, you know, I always remind myself, I'm a creator. I'm not a consumer. You know what I mean? I'm a creator,
Right.
not a consumer. And it like, boom, boom. And it's like, oh, what am I doing? I'm wasting my life. Let me get out of here.
Yeah.
You know, I'll scroll maybe for like 5 minutes, but then that triggers me. It's like a cue. It's weird. It's like something that always comes back and it motivates me. Sometimes I literally just create a post because I don't want to be a consumer. I want to make sure I'm bringing value. And so we got to start playing these games with ourselves mentally, right? These little word games to really encourage us to stay on track. But have you leverage any habits like this, Henry, to kind of eliminate distractions out of your life? You turn your phone off. I know you got some cool ones, man. I've seen you have kind of like optimal time. And speak a little bit about your process, man.
I really, you know, sometimes I gotta admit my weakness, right? Instagram, you know, when you turn it on, like you said, 5 minutes can go by like this, and you know, you can have certain apps on your phone where it'll block certain type of apps for a period of the day, right? So like Instagram on my phone, I can't access it really until about 7:15, I think it is, at night from when the day starts. And I will notice myself if I'm perhaps stressed during the day, I'll reach for my phone to go on the Instagram phone to kind of relieve and get that dopamine fix. But because of that block, it's just not a distraction. I cannot use it. I mean, there are ways around it, but by the time the app has this kind of feature built in where when you click it, it'll give you another 30 seconds and really ask you how you're feeling. It's like, you know, when you sit there with your phone in your hand, you're trying to negotiate, you feel ridiculous. So you just put it away, right? But
That's right.
you know, it's, you know, but I think for the nature of my job, I have to have my phone on me. It's like the main thing that I use. So that was the only thing I could really just use to kind of roadblock that that bad habit of scrolling during the day.
Yeah, and something else I remember you used to do, Henry. You used to go in like to like, I don't know, like office hours with other people, like
Oh yeah,
online.
yeah.
What's it
Shout
called?
out to
Let folks know about that. What's that called?
That's called Flow Club. It's
Nice.
this app that's used to. It's a concept called body doubling. So essentially, humans, when you're around somebody, you know, let's say we're both sitting in a room and you're working, I'm going to be inclined to do the same thing. You know, just off you know, the nature of homeostasis. It's like I'm trying to get to your level. So when you're in a flow club session online, you're in a room with 20 people and you'll state exactly what you intend to get, you know, accomplished in that 60-minute period. And then the chat goes off and the kind of the music plays. But you'd be amazed, man. You're just locked in because you know you have somebody else who you've told what you want to get done, which gives you kind of that accountability piece as well. I mean, they can see you on the webcam, right? Like you have to be working. So that's like a hardcore. Like if you need to get something done, go on that app, turn it on, and I guarantee you'll get it. You'll be good for sure.
How much is Flow Club, Henry? How much does it
Flow
cost?
Club right now is $40 a month, unlimited sessions, 24 hours a day. You can literally be in a work session with someone across the globe, which is so cool. You can really network a ton. You know, you meet a lot of graphic designers, people who kind of have their own curriculum with work in terms of like the schedule. So yeah, $40. And then if you want to become like a host, you can get it for $20 a month. But you have to be kind of on that app pretty often and doing your sessions.
Locked
But
in,
great
man.
stuff. Yeah.
You know, it's funny, right? Because that whole concept, Henry, really ties into like the main theme in this chapter. Motivation is overrated. We are changed by the world around us. And so when you enter an environment of high productivity, guess what happens to you? You become a person of high productivity. You know,
Absolutely.
it ain't rocket science. And so I really love you sharing that, man, because it really has helped you probably elevate your game and, really speak on and speak truth to what Kurt Lewis shares. He quotes Kurt Lewis, who's a psychologist. The formula is B equals FPE. Behaviors equal functions of a person. Behaviors equal the function of a person's environment. So it's awesome that you shared that, man. Even in the grocery store, they talk about this philosophy of how products are placed to get people triggered to buy those products. So end caps are where the money's made. Like in a grocery store, people pay a premium to have their products on an end cap. So, it just speaks on really controlling our environments for better or worse. And for us who want to be productive and have productive lives, that means for better. So appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think, of course. I think in a world of so much distraction, we really do need to tap in more to our biological state, what comes natural to us, right? If I could tell you that all you have to do is sit in a room with someone else who's working for you to get your work done, just naturally, know nothing else. I just think that books like Atomic Habits, they're just giving you the cheat code that's already within you,
Yes.
And I think that's you can take it anywhere. So the more you know about it, the more you can really just, find ways to just, get more done naturally.
Exactly. Something else that was kind of crazy when I read it was he talked about heroin addicts in Vietnam, American heroin addicts, right? Do you remember that part where pretty much every soldier in Vietnam was using heroin, some addicted more than others? And there were major concerns about when these soldiers come home, what is going to happen? And guess what happened? About 9 out of 10 of them got off heroin almost immediately. When they were in Vietnam, under high stress, under high duress, high pressure, it was crazy, bro, where folks felt like they had to do something to cope with that. I couldn't even imagine being in that situation, to be honest with you. And so their coping mechanism was drug use. But when they came home, only 1%, or 10% of them still stuck to the drugs. The other 90% pretty much quit cold turkey overnight, which is just unheard of. And so to really drive this point home, you guys have to be very intentional about the environments you create for yourself. Yes, the habits are more in your control, but if you want to be high level, get around high level people, get in the rooms like this, and continue to work on yourself. So that's pretty much it for the first chapter we're covering tonight, chapter 2. And really the second law is the next piece here. But anything you want to add before we move on, Henry?
I think it's just super important to be around the right people. It really is a contagious energy.
Yep.
When someone is really moving at a certain pace, it just brings you up. Naturally, for the ones like I love to compete. Not that I want to beat somebody or be better. You just want to be in that energy of making yourself better. So I think that's really what it plays to for a lot of people.
Yes. Awesome, man. So this next section here, we're going to cover in the last 30 minutes of the call tonight. And guys, feel free to chime in on the chat. Feel free to ask questions. We want this to be interactive. So we just don't want to be up here talking and being talking heads, running our mouths and not resonating with you guys. So feel free to, give us a fist pump, thumbs up, whatever emoji your heart desires to really show us that you agree. Or if you disagree, this isn't something where we want everyone on the call to be like, oh yeah, agree with us, right? We want folks to speak their truth, because to me, that's how you're going to get the most out of this. We're going to get the most out of this, having conversations around different perspectives. But Damien, you said the secret of your future is hidden in your daily routine. Yes, sir. That is correct, man. I mean, that's really the theme in this book. I like the way he opens up the second law in this next chapter, chapter 3. He kind of starts off on the negative side of habits, right? He talks about super normal stimuli, or basically how our society has been designed to overstimulate us, which leads to some of the worst habits and takes us off track, guys, right? This is really powerful right here, because he touches on some real stuff, right? First and foremost, he talks about food. That's an addiction. He talks about porn. He talks about shopping, video games, scrolling, phones, everything that is really kind of designed to hack our brains and hack our dopamine. He opens it up like, yo, y'all need to get this in check. And I really appreciate that, because it's kind of like a punch in the face when you first start, because we all struggle with something in some form when it comes to our days. And, he gives the example of like the animals, right? He talks about the baby gulls and how they kind of had the mother, when they tap the mother's beak, she gets some food. And these baby birds, if you give them like giant red dots or 3 red dots, they go crazy. The same goes with us when we're presented with this type of overstimulation, right? And as men, guys, we really have to be very careful not to get caught up in a lot of these things that can really distract us. Porn being a big one for a lot of guys out there. Food as well and different things, right? And so how do we fight those urges? How do we really get rid of those bad habits? It's really, he doesn't give a very clear answer on that. But he basically speaks on replacing those bad habits with different habits, right? And habit stacking, so that we are dedicating our time and having those triggers around our house that trigger us to do different things in different places. So what are your thoughts on that, Henry? Any thoughts on, how you deal with the negative side, right? And distractions and habits that really don't serve you?
And I've noticed that, I just lean on the environment. You just know that if you have a certain group of friends in your life that have a good time doing X, Y, and Z, you don't want to do that. You have to stay away from it. If you go in that situation, you have to expect yourself to react, and it might be in a negative way. So I think I analogy and really put it in a lot that I do. If I'm you just want to be around people who are gonna just bring the best out of you.
Absolutely, man. So you don't think, for a man who's trying to get their life in check and their life in discipline, Henry, do you think it's wise for that guy to be hanging out at a strip club at a regular basis?
Some guys can do it. I don't judge. You know what I mean, right? There are guys who can do those. Have you seen Sinners, the movie? Have you been able to watch it yet? So great movie, and it touches on this, and essentially the vampires are the people who are out late at night doing the devil's work, right? All this crazy stuff. But that energy, in the movie they portray it, that even if you're someone who is in the light, when you get over there, you're gonna be attracted to the darkness. It's not your fault. You're a human being. It's like you said earlier. That stimulation, that's what it is. And, to knock yourself for it is crazy, but to continue to put yourself in that situation repeatedly is also crazy.
Well, that's the piece right there, Henry. You nailed it. Stay out of the environment that's going to trigger or cue you to engage in behaviors that are against where you want to go and what you want to do, right? Like, one of my son was telling me he has teammates right now that were really, really good players, but these kids are hanging with the wrong crew. And what are they doing, right? They're drinking, they're smoking weed, and guess what's happening on the field? Their performance is going down. It's not rocket science. And I told my son, and here's the crazy part about this, guys. I know growing up, there are guys out there who can drink, smoke, and perform at a high level right when they're young. But 90% of people can't do that. And so if you want to be optimal in your life, stay out. And that's what he says, just basically stay out of the environments that trigger you to engage in destructive behaviors and behaviors that overstimulate you. Because there's nothing good that's going to come out of it. Nothing good that's going to come out of it. So the other big thing he gets on in this is dopamine, right? And that's really like what triggers us to move, to act. And it was pretty interesting. I found this part really, really interesting, because he said that us liking an activity is more powerful than the rewards that come from the activity, or the anticipation of the activity is more powerful than actually doing it. And it blew my mind when he talked about gambling. And I've experienced this before in certain capacities, with certain things like trading stocks, where you can get instant wins and make money. And even when I was young, going to the casino, I never forget the first time I went to Las Vegas. Me and a friend, we were in our 20s, right? We didn't have that much money, man. We probably had like, I don't know, 500 each. And we went out there and it broke after like 2 days. You know what I mean? Well, we weren't no big ballers, man, but
we've all been there.
Right.
We
just wanted to be in the minute, get some free drinks, play some slot machines, play some roulette or whatever. And my boy ended up going and maxing out his credit card. I was out after 2 days. He got 2 more days. He maxed out his card. He had like a $3,000 limit, and it was gone, bro. I was like, yo, what did you do? He couldn't stop himself. And so the crazy thing about dopamine and like gambling addiction, they say, is one of the worst, because people who are addicted to gambling, they become addicted to the thrill of playing the game, not winning. Did you hear what I said? They become addicted to playing the game, not winning. So like, even when they win, they're not as satisfied as when they're wishing or anticipating playing and then potentially winning. It's a really strange psychology, but dopamine, if unchecked, has the power to destroy our lives. And so that's what he says. Like, we have to be conscious of this. I mean, this chapter is really warnings and pointing out how we're wired so that we can start to ensure we do not go into environments that are going to overstimulate us and take us off track to really where our energy needs to be. What are your thoughts on that, Henry? You agree? You disagree? You think?
I think the overstimulation.
Yeah.
What was that?
You agree, though, that it's wiser to stay out of those environments, or you think some guys can handle it? I personally think you're always playing with fire. And when you play with fire, what's going to happen? You're going to get burned, man.
Yeah.
But you can disagree with me if you
For
want
sure.
to.
No. The thing is, like, we all we all get to a point in our life where that you start to see it for what it really is, right? So when it no longer becomes a calling, it's not as hard to say no. Like, now for me I can say no to a few parties in a month and not feel like a FOMO, right? But prior, it wasn't that way, So, but in terms of the overstimulation, I think that when you indulge in certain things like staying out drinking late night, or chasing girls and things like that, there's another side to that dopamine, high. It's the low. It's the next day where you got to deal with the consequences of what you did, because you're not. I mean, hangovers now at my age are just terrible, So it's like, I give here, but I got to give it back here. So I think the overstimulation is like, if you don't find joy in things that are just keep you even keeled, you tend to just go off the deep end very, very often.
Yep. The only other coping mechanism he offers in this chapter is what he calls temptation building. And he uses the example of a guy who loves to watch Netflix and chill, right? He likes to indulge and watch his shows, the whole nine. And so this guy basically rigged his stationary bike to where he could not watch Netflix unless he was pedaling at a certain speed. And so he merged the behavior of working out with getting an instant reward, an instant hit of dopamine. So he was like encouraged to pedal faster if you wanted to get more stimulation, which I think is cool, right? I think if we can find ways to merge a temptation, the guilty pleasure, with a positive habit that leads to the ultimate result we're looking for, that's leveraging creativity that will allow us to find ways to hack these negative habits and transform our lives. But that was really the only, other than avoiding it altogether, he's like, when you can leverage temptation building in order to help you on that journey. So that was pretty much it for Matt's section, man. Anything else you want to add, Henry, before we move on to the role of family and friends in shaping habits?
No, I think we're good.
Cool. This was a big one for me because, guys, I didn't grow up in the best environment, right? Coming up, I grew up in Dorchester. My dad was a unit electrician. My mom was a hairstylist and a preschool teacher when I was a kid. They got divorced when I was 8 years old, actually, 1989, when I was 8. Very traumatic for me. So I was living this great life as a little kid. And then divorce happens and I'm living this low life. We're on the streets. We're homeless. We're living with my uncle. And it was just a very, very weird life, guys, because, prior to that, I thought everything was smooth. And I thought that, life was just perfect. And it was shattered in an instant. And it really just, it played with my mind and made me start to think, become very insecure about things and money and life and time and everything else. And so, when it comes to the role of our families and friends shaping our lives, we don't know that our environments are really shaping us and teaching us how to cope with things or teaching us how to look at the world, but it is, and it's subconscious. And so he really talks about when we're in certain environments, we want to comply to make our friends happy, our parents happy, our cousins happy. And the crazy part is a lot of those people aren't even happy with themselves, but they're engaging in activities because that's the way it's done. That's the way they were taught. And so we have to start to recognize what habits serve us and what habits don't. And one of the biggest shifts for me in the last couple of years, I went through a breakup with some guys who used to work with me. They were my friends. We went our separate ways. And the crazy thing that happened, guys, it made space in my life for all these amazing people that are more aligned with who I am and are doing the things that I want to do and living the way I want to live. And so what I would say, and he talks about this, is don't unconsciously internalize all these negative habits that are keeping you where you are. Start to be intentional about, all right, looking at each habit that you've adopted and looking at the way you live your life and saying, is it serving me? Is it in line with the goals I want? Are the people around me living the lifestyle I want to live? And if they're not, you need to change, guys. You got to get up on out of there, man. You need to change. It's really, really important because community embeds identity. I thought that was a powerful quote, and it's something we don't talk about consciously, but, we have to really internalize that and understand what that means relative to how we can leverage that in a different way by changing our communities to embed a new identity, because habits can be broken, new habits can be formed. You know, the old habits will always be there when we change the environments, because we can be triggered, and we got to be careful about that. But I thought it was really powerful that he really attacked social norms. It was like, yo, you guys have to change, man. You can't stay where you're at and expect to get somewhere else. It just doesn't work that way. So have you seen this play out in your life, Henry? Have you changed friend groups? Have you elevated yourself by hanging around different people? Speak on that a little bit.
I think it goes down to the identity thing. That's been something that really has helped me, especially in the last year. Is really ask yourself what you truly identify with and what you believe yourself to be. Because I think when you're a certain type of person, you're just not going to do the things that are contrary to that. I think that really, distinguishing what you do on a day-to-day basis is who you really, believe yourself to be. Are you an athlete? Like, you go to the gym every day? I do. I believe that in my mind. I've had that belief for probably over 10 years, because it's something I've always showed up to do. So, I like doing that. And I think when it comes to reading or perhaps going to networking events, different things, if you believe yourself to be a certain type of person, you're going to find yourself in rooms with similar people. Just
Absolutely,
naturally.
man. Yep, agreed. Naturally, you will. But I also will argue, Henry, that you have to be intentional about it. And you're right. Once you start changing, you are going to get in those rooms. But I would also add this, right? Always look at the body of the work of the person that you're modeling yourself after, of the people in the rooms you're in. And if they're living how you want to live, if they're making the kind of money you want to make, and they're getting the results out of their life that you desire to have, then you're in the right room. But if they're not, you need to find another room to be in, guys. You need to find another room to be in. I think that's really a big part of this, and that's been a huge piece for me. I know how much money I want to make, and I know what kind of lifestyle I want to live. And so I need to get around people who are doing that now as quickly as possible, because that's the fastest way. That's a cheat code to really elevating yourself and figuring out what habits will serve you and what habits won't serve you. I call it modeling, and it's kind of my take on this. And I tell my son, right, he's a soccer player, and I love to use him as an example. And I always ask him, like, all right, this week, who are you modeling yourself after? And he'll talk about a player he's modeling himself after, this move, that attribute, whatever the case. But it's the fastest way to kind of pull greatness out of yourself by modeling yourself after people greater than you. And when I say greater than you, we're all capable, but who've achieved greater heights and greater feats than you've achieved that you can learn from. What are your thoughts on modeling, Henry? Do you look at that and model yourself after others as far as your systems, your tools, kind of how you approach your day, your habits?
Yeah, I think naturally, as you try to do self-improvement, you're just going to kind of be attracted to certain individuals because they may have something that you admire, and you'll kind of try to imitate that trait. But I think, like right before we ended your statement, is that when you identify as when you visualize yourself as somebody who's like that, you're kind of already propelling yourself towards that version of yourself. I don't even think you necessarily need someone else to model. I mean, obviously it helps. The things that you want to get done have already been done, and it's awesome to have examples. But I think by seeing yourself as that, that quote unquote best soccer player like your son's doing, I think, if he were to visualize himself doing some amazing move on the field, he will actually accomplish that just by seeing himself do it. And I'm a huge proponent of that, of like seeing yourself in that light before it happens.
Agreed. And Henry, that's the key, right? The modeling is a function of seeing yourself do it by seeing someone else do it. So meaning,
yeah, for sure,
he's seeing, let's say, Cristiano Ronaldo do a move he wants to do, and now he's modeling himself, practicing it. Then he's visualizing himself doing it in the game. So I think it goes hand in hand, and it's kind of like a cheat code
Absolutely.
to me, because the fact that someone else did it, it'll elevate you, but then you start to own it, and you're able to do even more yourself. So I think that's, to me, is the beginning of where we can definitely find ways to kind of find shortcuts to success. And not even, I won't say shortcuts, but shortcuts to self-mastery. And then we can now start to apply that in a different way, man. But no, I appreciate you sharing that. One other quick quote. He ends the chapter with a quick quote that basically says, let me see here.
Yeah.
It's the I versus we mentality. It's a lot easier to change your kind of your social norms and kind of the behaviors and habits that you'll accept when you're in an environment where everyone adopts habits that align with where you're going versus staying where you are, like just you on your own trying to kind of buck the trend. It's a losing battle. We all heard those stories about people with great intentions. They talked about people going to rehab and they're doing amazing in rehab. And then after rehab, where are they going? Right back where they came from. And what happens? Yeah. They get right back on the drugs.
Yep.
Right. So that's it, man. That's it. So, I think that's really important to just understand that the community piece will really propel you a lot faster to really get into where you want to go as far as your income potential.
Right. You broke up a little bit, but yeah, it is.
And lifestyle.
It is.
Yep. Cool, man. And then at the end, he starts talking about how to find and fix the cause of your bad habits. Right? Are you there, Henry? Can you guys hear me? How we doing out there on this live stream? Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you guys can hear me.
It's in and out.
It's in and out.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me now? I feel like the Verizon commercial. How about now? Can you guys hear me? Okay, Damien, you can hear me? Beautiful. All right, I see that. I'll keep going here. Henry's probably going to join us. He has some technical difficulties, but the next section really talks about how to find and fix the causes of your bad habits. And in speaking about that, he talks about someone who quit smoking and how he read a book that spoke to the truth about smoking. And really the reality is, when it comes to smoking, the truth is that you don't need to smoke. You can find other ways to relieve your stress, right? You can work out and really enhance your body's ability to deal with stress. And ultimately, it's not something that's essential to you living a great life. And so it really starts to unravel, habits relative to actual needs versus wants, which is, it sounds simple, but if you're reading a book that's constantly ingraining this in you, he really talks about attacking the underlying motives for what we do versus cravings and where cravings come from. And so if you look at it from that lens, he gave the example of, hey, I love tacos, right? But really, when I want to go eat tacos, what I'm saying to myself is I'm hungry and I need food and nourishment. Mm-hmm. And so the same goes for all of these desires we have, right? When it comes to how we live and operate, obviously as men, when men are out here trying to get girls and chasing women and all that, right? It's a desire to procreate in the long run, but we're looking for that instant gratification. And, he really starts to speak on just, if you want to change your behaviors, start to look at the underlying motivations as a way to see if it's what the way you're trying to fulfill that motivation or that need is essential to your success. What are your thoughts on that, Henry?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the whole stop and calling thing, right? I mean, when you have that desire to really kind of sit and like, yo, what am I actually trying to fulfill right now? What am I really feeling? I think that's huge. I think you can open up a lot of doors in yourself when you ask yourself those kind of questions,
Correct. Yeah, no, and that really is it, man. I mean, at the end, he starts to talk about historically as human beings, right? We have dealt with all types of stuff historically to survive. Back in the day, we were in a very calorie starving environment. Now we have a calorie dense environment. We had to have sex to procreate, and now people do it for pleasure, right? We have all of these different things that are just so easily accessible, which we talked about earlier, and it's really finding ways to get back to basics. It's interesting, right? Because I think it works for some folks, kind of being able to kind of be objective. But I think people, in my opinion, right, this is not the best way to cope with these things because people are so entrenched in, I want this because I want this, right? I want to live this life because I want to live this life. And so I think to kind of really deal with some of these habits that, overeating and things of that nature, I think the coping mechanisms he gave prior really are the key, and that's changing your environment, removing those obstacles, making it easy to engage in good habits and hard to engage in bad habits. And if we do that, apps like what you shared on the phone, Henry, or where you limit the time, or going into flow and going into a virtual room or a real room where everyone's working diligently at a high level, is going to ultimately allow you to avoid a lot of the time you would need to engage in these bad habits to begin with. But me personally, the end of this chapter, as far as his approach to it, it was more kind of speaking, and maybe to some people who cope with it differently. I don't know about you, Henry. Is that a good coping mechanism for you? Is thinking about whether or not you need it versus versus you want it?
No, I think if I'm gonna be honest with myself, I try to not even have the conversation. If I need to get something done, I do need to construct an environment where we all have will, we can use it, but when things are important to you, you gotta just use the the emergency button, right? An emergency button is just clearing the environment and not giving yourself any distractions or excuses.
Yep. Excellent, man. Anything else you want to share, Henry, that resonated with you at, I guess, the early stage of the book? I know you read it 3 times. Key takeaways, from these sections we covered tonight or from the beginning, that you want to leave the folks out there with, that you feel, I guess, were the most impactful for you thus far.
I think you're the identity part. I think that for some reason that really just resonates with me, is not necessarily trying to use my willpower to not do something or do something, but to just say that I am that person. For some reason, that just does it clicks for me where, I can see it before it's already happening. I think for a lot of us who are trying to do things that we're a little bit uncomfortable with, you do need to see yourself do it first before you can just go in it, and just try to wing it. I think it just does. It just gives yourself a good chance of getting it done by just visualizing it.
I like that. So yeah, I think self-talk is powerful. Self-talk is powerful. Affirmations are also powerful, but I think you have to take action. It's got to be coupled with action, right? And I'm glad you mentioned that, Henry, because I know I talk to myself all the time. Like, I got this. It's something I constantly say when I'm facing a challenge or facing something I'm struggling with, and it just keeps me going forward no matter what. And I think that's a habit that I think everyone on the call should adopt, especially if you're a man of faith. We're not called to be people who worry. We're called to be conquerors. We're called to be people who believe in our abilities. We're called to be people who pray and understand that it's going to happen if it's his will for our lives. And most importantly, that God doesn't desire anything negative for us long term, but he does put us in negative situations to shape us, mold us, and make us stronger. And I think for me, it's really understanding that every negative situation is a stepping stone for growth. If that struggle, we need it, we embrace it, right? As men, that's a part of the journey. Like, we can't be afraid of it. We got to lean in on it. And I think that's really been a big piece of how I've coped with some of the hardest situations I've had to deal with in my life. And then also kind of looking at the stories of others who've come before us and dealt with similar situations and thrived. And I think finding stories out there with folks like that and people like that is inspiring. And it just gives us an idea of what our journey may look like. Nothing's guaranteed, but I think it's really important to have that positive self-talk, to understand the power of faith, and understand that you never are going to grow if everything works out. It's the pain that leads to the growth, right? The transformation. And once we can embrace that as men, I feel like we can overcome anything. We can get through anything. And that's really a big part of this, because James, this book is really good at identifying a lot of what we struggle with. But ultimately, these are the things that we have to find ways to figure out which one of these methods work relative to what we're trying to do in our lives. But anyone in the chat have questions, comments, please let us know, because we definitely want to support you guys who are watching this and who've been on with us this evening, and just help you on your journey. Anything else, Henry, you want to add? Or
man, I was going to tap into what you said a few months ago, man. When we were talking, you said that the human mind is the greatest 3D printer of all time. Remember that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That is so true. Like, if you can see it, you can literally have it happen in your life. But But again, you got to believe you're that person. I think when you said that, it's like, wow, you could really, you want to do a development deal or you want to, do X, Y, and Z with your body. It's like, see it first, and then you'll be surprised at what can happen because it'll get printed,
Yeah, visualization is a powerful method for finding ways for us to tap into our greatest potential. And I think to drive it home, and I'll bring it home, guys, everything you see in your environment existed in someone's mind before it existed in reality. Think about that for a second. Everything, cars, houses, phones, you name it, right? This was in Steve Jobs' head before it came into the physical world. It was in the spiritual world first, right? And so the same goes for us. And my question to all of you is, what's stopping you from leveraging that same ability that's innate in you to really create 3D print your lives, right? And to me, it's really just one thing. And I call it the truth gap. It's the difference between what you know today and what you need to know to create that life for yourself. And so if you commit to closing that gap, anything and everything is possible for you guys, So I think that is really important that we all commit. Obviously, you guys are on this call, so you're committed to learning from this book what we can learn in order to make that leap and have that transformation. But that's really the only thing between where you are now and where you want to be. It's a discovery of an unknown truth that's going to get you there. And that's it for me, guys. That's my final thoughts tonight. Appreciate you getting on here. Damien said vision without action is a daydream, and action without vision is a nightmare. Well said. That's right. You got to have action in order for vision to come to life. And then action without vision is a nightmare. That's right. Because you're just moving. You don't know where you're going, and you might end up walking off a cliff.
Yeah. You'd be surprised, man. I feel like a lot of us can work hard for something that we don't, in the beginning, you just know you want to be successful. But I've come to find out that doesn't really mean anything.
Correct.
Because all successful as long as you're in the pursuit of your goal. I think as long as you're moving forward, that you are successful. But when you don't have a clear picture on what you're trying to do, whether it be a dollar, income, whatever it may be, like a house in a certain location, it can become very vague. And I think the people who tend to get things done, like the iPhone, he was very, that was a clear picture in his mind, and here we, it wasn't like what's it kind of going to look like? It's going to be that,
Right. And that was curated over time. And that's the thing about growth. It's iterating on what's already been done. It's educating yourself on where things are and where you can take them to make them better. That's the key to innovation. And there's a great book out there, if you guys haven't read it. It's called The Innovation Secrets of Steve Jobs, that really shares his process on how he was able to be so innovative when it comes to, his journey and all the things he created in the short 50 years or so that he lived. So appreciate everyone getting on tonight. Real quick announcement, Henry, thanks for jumping in.
Sir,
we are definitely going to be doing another call coming up on Tuesday, book call next week. But on Tuesday, we have Deshaun, who is a trader. He's going to show us some live trades for those of you guys who are interested in making sure you get your financing game right. He's a young 28-year-old who's been trading for the last 4 or 5 years. He left his corporate job, is now a trader and very successful. And so if you want to learn trading and you're not in the Investor's Edge, DM me, send me a message. We'll send you the link to join. It's only $97 a month. We've had some amazing calls, and I'm super excited to really help you guys grow. And I think the biggest benefit to it is, one, the community, right? We talk about an environment that's going to help you change. And then the education piece. We have nearly 20 hours of programming in there that you will have access to about mindset, personal development, physical fitness, crypto, stocks, and real estate. And so if you really want to get access to a library of information that is really going to help move the needle and get you to double your income, get your waistline in check, and just have better relationships because you have a better mindset, what are you waiting for, guys? Like, real talk. This is why we created it, to bring value and fill voids in your life that you may need help filling right now. So appreciate everyone getting on there. If you have questions about the Investor's Edge, it's in our school community. We'll get on, and let's do it again next week, guys. I'll see some of you Tuesday. I'll see the rest of you Sunday. God bless. Henry, thanks for getting on, and that's a wrap.